Zdravo, dobar dan, and that will be all in Serbian for today. Hello and welcome, first of all. Welcome to the 14th edition of Innovation Space. The format ICT Hub has launched with a mission to engage and embrace a growing community of corporate innovation leaders, practitioners, agencies, studios, startup founders who want to collaborate with corporations, and etc. My name is Costa, and on behalf of the whole team, I would like to welcome you all. I will be your host today. Hopefully, we will not have any technical difficulties. I'm sitting in a one space within ICT Hub, which sometimes can be quite confusing, but hopefully this time everything will work fine. Couple of news. It's our 6th birthday today, and I would say that I'm honored so I can celebrate it also in this kind of session, one of my favorite topics. And also I have two truly amazing guests who have been dear friends and partners of ICT Hub for years now. And starting from now, I will try to put some introduction, and in further conversation, I will try to be the devil's advocate and to try to challenge some of the aspects of the topic we have today. So, startup culture, why it matters and how corporates can adopt it. Does it matters, and if it matters, how can we adopt it? Is it even possible? How can we even compare these two? And I think also this will be a great contribution to the third part of Corporate Innovation Conference we're organizing this year. It's of course online, and the third edition is on 25th of November, which will be kicked off by Tema, our special guest, but also some other amazing speakers, which will bring some value specifically in the topic of organizational cultures and how we can empower champions of innovation within our organizations. So without further ado, I would like to ask Elina and Max to join us at this virtual stage. I will put some, I would say, quite short intro about both of them and why I think they're perfect match for this kind of a panel. Elina Zheleva, hi and welcome. It's 5 p.m. in Sofia, right?
That's right.
Nice to see you and hear you. Max, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, Costa.
A couple of notes from my side. Elina is a managing partner at Launch Labs. What is pretty cool about our guest today is that she has amazing experience actually working with companies such as ING, Telenor. She will tell you more and more, but definitely somebody who is hands-on supporting corporates into, I would say, changing the way how they work, how they build products, how they change the environment in which they, I would guess, we all expect to act differently, but eventually hit some business targets. On the other side, here is Max. While preparing for this talk, Max told me that, if I remember good, since 80s, it didn't happen that you didn't travel out of Bulgaria. So this
well, out of any country, Costa. Yeah, exactly.
Out of any country.
It's been a weird period of no travel, but it's what it is.
I would say that Max is currently managing partner of Vitosha Ventures, recently established and operating actually venture capital fund. But I would say for the audience in the region, somebody who is I would say usual suspect within the startup ecosystem. Sometimes as a founder, but I would say definitely somebody who was part of 11 Ventures. I would say the first venture capital, which definitely showed in Serbia, but broadly across the Eastern Europe. But for this aspect, Max is somebody who truly knows the genome of the startup team. And then we'll have this parallel how we can transfer or not, or take part of the genome and put it in a place within the corporate. So Elina, let me start with you. Please feel free to add some additional comments regarding the Launch Labs and your work, but do you sometimes get the question from the client of how does this first meeting looks like? Do they come and they say, hey, can you bring us some startup culture within our organization, or how does it start? Who do you talk to? When the whole aspect starts?
Good question. Thanks for the introductions. Nothing more to add on that side. You made it very clear that I know corporations and Max knows startups, and that's why we are here to bridge the two worlds together today. So how does it start? It starts in all sorts of different ways, to be honest. Sometimes it could be a conversation with not really the top leadership. Sometimes it's just someone very active inside the company. For example, I don't know, head of marketing, or even a project manager, or, you know, it doesn't have to be like C-level, but they're very active in what they do. They're proactively looking for better ways to do it. And when I say better, I mean faster, and with less resources, but to the point, like to the customer point. And then they could reach out to us. And sometimes it's a question of, can you help me on this specific project? Because as a studio, you know, we call ourselves business redesign studio. We do two main things. You know, we help companies achieve faster results on projects, but we also help more ambitious companies where really it's the C-level that comes to us and says, we want to do a little transformation in the company. We really want to change the culture. And then, you know, in the second scenario, the conversation very often starts from the top. And it's, I don't know if they use the exact words like, can you implant the startup genome? But they would say something along the lines of, we want to be faster. We want to be more efficient. We want to be more customer-centric. And they would give the reasons why. That's how the conversation goes.
Let us use the startups maybe as a paradigm of the new age, and not so as a specific organizational model. But let me assume, and you will say if it's true or not. But part of your clients of corporations, maybe they come in a stage when they're already maybe lost some of the revenues, thankfully, to startups, but not only to startups. Maybe they are looking for new areas to grow. Where do you see that? I would say necessity or the need. Maybe it's is it a buzzword for some of them? Is it kind of a Disneyland for somebody? We would like to. We see this is a hit now. We would like to try something. Where do you see different needs, and maybe depending on that need, is it a necessity or it's something which is nice to have? Why do they want to be faster? What happened?
So based on my experience, most of our clients, and I would dare say all corporations, have either lost revenue or a client base, or are in a position to see this coming very closely. So it's a very real change out there in the world that they're trying to prevent. Of course, we have a few clients that are outliers that have always been very innovative and are, you know, just trying to stay in top shape. Clearly, we have such outliers, but most of the companies we work with, these would be leading banks, leading telecoms, leading pharma companies, leading logistics. They're by all means still leaders on the market, but have they lost revenue? Yes. From whom? Startups, maybe, but also from the big tech companies, from other competitors for sure. So yes, the threats are out there. Is it a buzzword? Yes and no. Sometimes, you know, sometimes it's a buzzword. Sometimes it's like, oh, you know, we've heard other similar companies like the other banks, for example, doing it. We want to do the same. We've seen other banks, and, you know, it's like now everybody does startup competitions inside the companies, entrepreneurship. Is it really working? I don't know, but they've seen others doing it. So sometimes it is a buzzword. but sometimes it's a very, very conscious approach to change the way companies work. Is it a necessity? I think most corporations need some sort of agility. We're not talking about, anyone becoming like a very, very hyper agile, innovative, artificial intelligence startups that turns out, new products overnight. I think most corporations don't need that super agility, but they need some sort of agility to help them deal with what they need to do, which is, run projects faster, run projects more efficiently, digitize, get rid of old administrative processes. Everybody needs that. There is no question whatsoever if there is a necessity. The necessity is there. The question is it a genuine understanding that you need this? Because there is a lot you will lose as well. So are you ready to lose a lot of things? I always, and I think I mentioned this in the preliminary conversations, I compare authenticity in this, desire to change to New Year's resolutions. Is it a true New Year's resolution that will stay with you for the whole year? Or is it something that you say to yourself in the beginning of the year because it sounds nice and because you need it, but you quit doing this transformation towards more agility, towards innovation after a month? Because it is really hard. It is really hard, and you have to, as an organization, as a corporation, there are so many things you need to change. So many things you need to stop doing, like, top bottom decision making, like setting individual KPIs, like, thousands of things.
Exactly, thank you. And getting to Max, at this point, early stage investor. And I will then get back to Elina when they decide, okay, let's develop new things, new products in a different way. Let's use some of the startup culture or methodology. But when you work or invest in early stage startups, what would be that culture which you see, which you like? What would be the environment when there is no, like, let's say, significant revenues? And maybe as an inspiration for you, I just saw this today. It was from Michael Siebel, one of the partners from Y Combinator. Mm-hmm. And he said, like, in early stage, he looked at a couple of things. I'll just share a couple of them. And maybe for Elina to imagine if Max was sitting in front of some team, like a corporate startup or internal corporate startup. So the question, mm-hmm. Michael, look at do you have the technical skills to build a product yourself? That's one. Mm-hmm. Then will you and your co-founders support each other in good times and bad? Can we have that kind of atmosphere in corporates? Are you actively improving your product over time? How well can you communicate your ideas? And the fifth is, do you know something about the space that others don't? So that will be his 5. What are your 5 or 2? Or
Right. This is a really good question, and I know Michael pretty well. Their operation is pretty much the example, as you know, Costa, for the whole world on how to run an accelerator program. Y Combinator is a legendary institution. We look, at very similar things, right? When we look at early stage startups, probably the best way to describe or to define the parameters we're looking at are the 3 T's, right? Team, technology, traction. The specific questions or the specific process of analyzing, a potential investee, the company that we might invest in at the very early stage when it's just a team of a few people. There are a few things you look at. Sometimes, not sometimes, always, there is discrepancy in these qualities, right? Sometimes they'll be much better technically, but have a lesser understanding of the industry that they're trying to disrupt. Sometimes it's a really good team, but they're not very good technically, but otherwise they have really good skills in, for instance, in sales or in marketing or in strategy. So, it's always a compromise, but generally it's team, technology, and traction, right? So you look at the team, are these people united by an idea? Do you think they can work together? Actually, as an early stage investor, one of the most difficult questions, and it's definitely a difficult topic for everyone, for investors, for founders, is to try to understand whether a founder will actually be able to grow into completely different roles, which are very often opposing to where they are now, right? Like at an early stage, you have to basically be able to, to get people enthusiastic about an idea, right? To get people to give you something, be it a client order or an investment, without actually having anything to prove for it, right? It's really based on good faith, right? So are you that kind of person? Are you willing to work, crazy, not just hours, but like 24/7 basically, to create that prototype or to create that early stage, version of a product? When the company continues, the founder will have to very quickly shift into a very different mode, into someone who's good at managing resources, good at being a good custodian of the investor's money. And so therefore, one of the most difficult things in startups is to basically have the founder grow into all these different roles as the years go by, right? Like a famous example, if you look at Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, that college kid in a hoodie and on flip-flops, who was in the dormitory building the first version of the product, which was really, to hit on girls on campus, like that's what it was for. And you see this guy today who is this, super powerful CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world, who literally can decide, who becomes president of which country almost. Like that transformation, he's still the head of exactly the same thing, right? It's exactly the same company, Facebook. That is the kind of transformation that, doing what Mark Zuckerberg did, that's unique and maybe not always healthy for everyone, but even a much smaller version of that is already a huge transformation. So those are the things you kind of look at. So the psychological aspect is actually, maybe to answer your question, maybe the most important one, right? Otherwise, obviously, you look at the tech and at this, to get back to the corporations issue, at whether these people, this founder team, have enough of an understanding of the industry they disrupted in. And this is where corporations come in, because if they haven't worked at one of those like older players that they're trying to disrupt, usually their understanding is not as good as one would wish it is.
Thanks, Max. And you didn't mention that word, but some kind of a passion. But you said the team has to be enthusiastic. So Elina, if we maybe you can describe us a process. We in a prep talk we discussed that you guys start with a pilot. So I guess it's a team within a corporation. You said you work with the corporation which have even over 5,000 employees. But when you start with that pilot, how do you grow that enthusiasm? How do you build that knowledge, which can be differently than competitors? How do you grow those internal founders, or do you do it actually? What can you borrow from the culture which Max just described?
I'm very happy that you picked up on the word enthusiasm, because I think that's one of the few good practices that could sustainably be brought from startups to corporations. Because it's true, if you have been in a startup, the atmosphere is much more dynamic, much more enthusiastic, and unsustainably so, to be fully honest. Max mentioned, how startups work like really long hours, and it's unsustainable in a corporation to expect, for many reasons, people to work like that overnight, on a project. But enthusiasm is one thing that we can sustainably bring in corporations, and it will do them good. And it comes naturally over time. Our recipe for corporations that truly wish to redesign themselves, because as I said, sometimes we work with corporations which just want to achieve results on one very specific project, and that's perfectly fine. But for those that are looking for larger scale, larger transformation within the company, our tried and tested recipe, and it works for very large corporations. We've worked with companies like Accenture that are 500,000 people in 120 countries around the world. And we've worked with companies that are just 5,000 people or 500 people, but the recipe is always the same. So you would pick some people that you want to start with. We call them the pilot teams, because you cannot it's not advisable, let's say, to start like an initiative to change the culture in the organization. Nobody will believe you. Nobody will believe you. They've heard it, they've seen it. Don't try that. People just get more suspicious as, okay, what's coming up again, another organizational transformation. So start small, pick a group of people that will work on real projects, put them together, like, and I'm speaking really of groups of 16 to 20 people, put them together, give them the basic.
Elina, how do you pick them? Who do you work with in picking them? How do you explain them what's in it for us? Okay, startup founders, they have equity, they have a skin in the game, they have so how do we transfer this atmosphere? Do we actually transfer it within the corporate? Where does the leadership take the place in that initial setting?
Okay, so two questions. How do we pick them is the first one, and then where is the place of leadership? How do we pick them is very easy, because you just have to decide on the projects that you want to work on, like one or two projects that are interesting, important to the company that you want to work on differently than, so to change the process. And then you would ask yourself, who would naturally work on these projects? Okay, IT, for example, or product development, or customer experience department, or retail, whatever. You would just handpick the people that naturally have to be involved in this project. That's, for me, the most authentic, most organic way to start. The role of leadership in this whole thing is, of course, they're kind of a default, like without leadership, we can't do anything. Leadership has to be aware, aligned, and supportive of this initiative. They have to.
Can you give us example, maybe when they were not aligned? Or maybe how can we describe it in that alignment? Or when you would be satisfied when you can say, okay, you're aligned now?
When they're not aligned, it just doesn't go through, because let's say head of product would say, yes, we need to implement Scrum, and head of marketing would say, we, for example, need to train the people in, I don't know, creative techniques. And they would be totally speaking different languages and would give different reasons for that. And they would be looking into typically their own departments. And this is not how startups work. They don't have departments, they work together. So the first thing for leadership is to be aligned, because people will have to work across departments. That's rule number one. That's why we're saying pick two important projects and then handpick the people from the different departments. And we'll do two simple things with them. We will get them into some sort of a very practical, hands-on training / alignment, just to give them really useful instruments, for example, how to run better meetings when they work in such multidisciplinary teams, how to quickly validate customer needs, how to prototype, how to be creative in such a team, like very, very simple things. And then we would start the projects, and we would go, iteration by iteration, and we'll coach them on these projects. And the reason, and they don't change their culture, mind you, nothing is changed. Enthusiasm builds up from two things. First is, if you were successful in picking the right instruments, and you're not always, sometimes you give them 10, they use only 5. Or sometimes you give them 10, they need 2 extra, but that's fine, because you give them down the road as you work on projects. As a coach, you can, give them more. So enthusiasm is built from them finding a use of this instrument and realizing that it helps them, realizing that, oh, I can do this quicker with this instrument, I can do my job quicker, or we work better as a team, or simple things. And then enthusiasm builds over time when they see how their work matters to the end customer. I think that's when the most enthusiasm gets built, because sometimes in corporations, you might be working on something and you would never see how this is related to the end customer. You might be siloed in many ways, not just only within your department, but due to the nature of the work, you might not be seeing the end impact of what you do. And in projects like this, you do, because you go from beginning to end on the project.
I think this is a perfect, when you mention, thanks, and when you mention customers, I think max with startup founders, or when they grow with definitely with the salespeople, they're hands-on on customer. That customer centricity is a how should I put it? The initially the part of a birth given part of the startup, or at least it should be. How do you recognize, or how can you? Because my experience is that startups will rarely on a meeting say we operate through a scrum, at least when they're in earlier seed stage. They don't recognize different agile methodologies. They develop some of their own work. They're still in discovery, touching different pains of customers, trying to solve them on different ways, answering different needs of the market. How do you challenge, or how do you as an investor know to recognize if they're truly onto some problem worth solving, but on a greater scale? How do they act? What kind of
on a validated level with customers, right? I mean, look, there's a very simple answer to this question. It really depends on whether they are already at what we call product market fit, right? So whether there is already, whether at least a few customers have basically validated that, this is a product they want, and they want to keep being a client of, right? Or whether they haven't, right? When they have, what you always do as an investor, especially if the ticket is, on the bigger side. Here at Pričaćali Venture Partners, by the way, we didn't get a chance to explain what I do, but with this fund, we invest very broadly. So we just launched a few months ago. We will be investing in well over 100 companies. Hopefully, a good number of them originally from Serbia. We're very open to that in the next several years. And we basically will invest, from very small tickets like 20, 25,000 euros, all the way up to some companies, not too many. We'll invest up to $1 million. It's very different sizes, right? So when it's a very early stage company, I'll actually get to that later. When you're investing, let's say 100 or 200,000 euros as an investor into a company, or maybe 500,000 euros, these are tickets that are for companies that already have some kind of what we call traction, right? So they already have a product. There are a few customers, hopefully quite a few, that are using it. One of the things we always do is basically we ask for an interview with one of their clients. They choose, of course, which one. They introduce us, and we have a chat. Just a few days ago, there's this very interesting energy kind of startup that we're looking at, based here in Bulgaria, and we talked to one of their clients, a pretty big corporation, and they gave us a really, really good feeling of, they're very enthusiastic clients, and that really helps us hopefully get to a decision to invest in this company. There are many other issues that we need to look at, but that is one that is very, very important. When a company still doesn't have, has that specific founder, how is he related to energy industry? How is he related to that? I guess some kind of need or a problem he's solving for them. Is there a clear connection? I'm trying to relate this to maybe. It's a good question. It's a good question, because unfortunately, of course, I'm not at liberty to talk too much about that company. But this is a good question to what we talked about before. How do you verify that when someone is building technology for a very complicated sector like the energy industry? How do you know that this founder has what it takes to understand the industry? In the case of this very company, these founders actually have worked within a large energy business. So these are very specific processes, very complicated processes that they're trying to, their solution is actually solving. And this was actually my first question when I met them, because they came very well recommended. And I was like, how do you guys, for me, it took me like a few hours to actually understand what it is that you guys are doing. And I know a little bit about the energy business, not too much, but still I know something. And then I very quickly understood that these guys, even though they're young and, maybe less experienced in business than I am at least, but they actually worked in that industry. So they have built within a different company, they have built solutions for this very problem, and now they're taking their own spin on it. So this is actually a really good question. The founders need to have. So they basically left some corporation, they spotted the problem, and they left a corporation to build their own thing. Exactly. And those are usually all the other boxes have to check as well and to get ticked, but this is an important criterion always. Yeah. Look, just to finish my answer to the previous question very briefly, if you don't have clients, then, what we always say in the venture capital business is that this is the reason that a team is so important, right? When you have a couple of people just with an idea, why do we always say, do we need a team, right? Because some people will say, like, why can't one person do it? Theoretically, yes, many great businesses were founded by one person. But the reason investors always want to see a team of 2, 3, 4, usually not too many than 4 if it's just an idea, because it's too crowded then. But the reason we want to see this is because we basically want to see that you're able to sell to at least someone to invest their time and their livelihood into this, right? You don't have a product yet that you can sell to a customer. This is just your first, investor conversation. You're trying to sell something to an investor, but having a team is validation that you can at least sell something. You're basically not crazy. You're not a crazy person. There's someone else who believed in what you do and is willing to give up, their free time or their job or whatever, usually savings as well, to do this, right? So this is the reason. This is where it comes to this sales validation, right?
Thanks. Elina, you mentioned a pilot team of 15 people. Let us assume that on average they have been working, 7 years, maybe within that organization, 6, it doesn't matter. And there is the old way of work. And you said it's important that they come from different departments. And let's imagine that they're building something which is not let's say a core business, but close to core. It's definitely new. How do you apply now something which actually they can adopt from this, I would say, let's say startup culture, but in a more broader sense? Some of these methodologies which you mentioned, and the other is in comparison with, do they now have some other colleagues within the company which can say, oh, there is that innovation team, they have some different metrics and they can fail it, but we as the rest of the organization, we still have old KPIs, and we have to take care of the core business, which is still, like bread and everything else for the company. Is that also a challenge?
Okay, I'm taking notes because there is so many layers of your question. So first, one remark that I was thinking about when Max was speaking about, startups and their connection with the problem, with the customers. In corporations, what I think is very different from most startups, especially early stage startups, is surprisingly corporations have a lot of data about their customers and have a lot of knowledge about their customers. Sometimes it's fragmented. Let's say IT would know one side of the story, marketing would know another side of the story, but they do have a lot of customer knowledge. That is for sure. The big goal on such projects that we do is to put together all this knowledge and to sharpen it, to make it useful to the specific project, because sometimes the knowledge is good for a marketing campaign, sometimes knowledge is good for product development, and depending on the project, we need to sharpen it and get those insights that we need for the specific project. And
who is then owner of the insight? When we compare it to the startup, it could be founders. So we have this example of they spinned off, they went out of energy corporation and started doing something on their own. When you gather from all those, let's say, pillars of corporation, different data, which are definitely valuable, who is then the owner of those insights? Of who is the one spotting the problem worth solving, or you the one who is actually coaching them on how to define the opportunity?
So that's the other thing, that the spotting of the problems is typically done, I think, at a management level very often. Like, whoever is, let's say we're trying to improve the digital platform, the e-commerce arm of a classical retail business, right? So there would be a project management, it might be called differently. It might be digital transformation manager, it might be a marketing manager, digital marketing. I mean, it might be called different, but there would be someone under whose head is all the monitoring on this e-commerce platform, right? And the problem solving would typically come from them, from their department. They would say, we want you to improve the payment process, or we want you to come up with a new offering or something like that. So the big problem would be already identified. Okay. But what the team has to do, what we have to do together with the team, is gather kind of the more detailed information and the problems under the surface. That's what we typically do with startups. Very rarely we would receive like a blank canvas with no information, even when we're looking for an innovation. Like a few years ago, we worked with a telecom, and they were looking for really a new revenue stream completely, so we had to come from scratch, but it was very determined in which domain. Like it was said, it has to be B2B, it has to be entertainment, and then how you have to look for more data.
Please, let's deep dive now. Of course, we don't have to mention the name of the telecom, but when they have defined this area or domains, maybe take us through some next steps. How did you move forward? How did you?
Yeah. So you said, who is the owner? From the moment we get we call it the design brief or the task, from there on, the whole team, and it doesn't have to be 15 people. We typically work with teams of 7-8 people. From there on, the team is the owner of all problems and all solutions. So we would go through some additional customer research. So we would be looking into all sorts of data, both quantitative data, so databases, and we would be digging into data. And if there is no data specialist on the team, we would find one within the organization, someone who can dig the data for us, and we'll tell them, this is what we need, guys. We'll do also data gathering that is maybe not there yet. So like additional customer interviews, additional observations, additional, just classical customer research. And we would synthesize it together with the team, because this is the only way they learn. We literally go step by step through the process as if we would do it ourselves, but we do it with them. We typically have 1 or 2 coaches working together with the team. And as I said, we do everything as we would do in real life. We then come up with ideas, we build prototypes, we test them. Sometimes, it has to be like, now we are working on a project where we have to do, hundreds of usability tests. Well, there are agencies for that. If we don't have the resource within the team or within the mother company, we'll have to use an external resource, but we have to get it done until, the end of we call it a sprint, or the end of the iteration, the end of the sprint. And we have some findings of, okay, this was the original problem. This was what we think is the real problem. And this is what we think might be the solution. And we've tested it, and this is the feedback we have.
And what you just described for those people participating in that team, the way how they sprinted, the way how they discovered the customer insights, all of the methodologies which your coaches are actually coaching them for, they were new for them, right?
Yeah, they were completely new for them. And we rarely coach people, so before the whole project starts, we would have 1 or 2 days, depending on the time availability, where we would do something like, training, I guess is the word, but it's very hands-on demo of different instruments. We tend not to teach pure methodologies like, this is design thinking, you should do it, from beginning to end, or this is Scrum, or this is service design, or whatever. We tend to handpick, because we have knowledge of what they want to achieve. We have knowledge of what are the problems they face as a team, some prior knowledge at least. So we would handpick either 1 or 2 methodologies and handpick instruments from these methodologies, and we'll demo them, so I guess what I'm trying to say is we don't over focus on the methodology. We focus on the instruments that it gives. How would this instrument help me have a more, efficient meeting? How would it help me have a more transparent backlog and manage my backlog? How would this help me build a prototype? How would this instrument help me be creative with a bunch of 8 other people that don't speak my language, you know, because I'm marketing and they're IT. So these are the things that we teach them in these 1 or 2 days before we start the project, and then it's real work. And then they're like, oh, remember we use this instrument that is called strategy roadmap or creative matrix. It might actually work here, something like this. And half of the instruments don't ever get used, and some get used all the time. Like, you know, some are very, very popular, like customer personas or customer journeys. These are favorites because they really help them understand the customer journey, the problem, the pain points. So that's what we do. That's how we infiltrate the company.
Infiltrate, the right word. Max, and after this, dear participants, don't worry, I'm not going to steal the show. We already have some questions. Max, maybe a short answer. So startup is growing. As an investor, you're satisfied, but do you have some kind of concern if they're going to stick with this enthusiasm, agility, focus on the customer? How do you, maybe from your previous work, how do you keep this speed, this customer centricity? Is it possible? When do you turn into this large organization? Then you need Elina to help you.
Right, exactly. I mean, look, this is very much according to the famous quote by Winston Churchill, right? That success is going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. That is exactly what startups actually do. It feels like failing all the time, but then if you fail often enough, that's where you succeed. That's what you call success, looking back usually. The trick is, the biggest trick in startup development, and this is where we as investors try to help. The difficult thing is to get skills and insights into a company that unfortunately aren't, usually, most of the time, aren't theoretical, right? If you could just read a manual, right? Or if you're a startup founder and things are going well, and then you just sign up for a course or you read a book and you learn how to CEO successfully, and then you implement it, that would have been very, very good, right? And I'm not trying to discount, all these wonderful people that are friends of mine, many of them who write books, who have TEDx talks or have video shows about how to successfully run a business. I mean, it's good for them that they share as much as they can from the skills. Reality is, though, that this is all very, very much what we call experiential knowledge, right? Experiential skill sets, experiential know-how. Our job as an investor is to open the eyes of the founder to where that knowledge could be gotten, and to basically introduce them to people who could be either an advisor or a hire, or maybe a C-level addition to the team, and sometimes replacing the CEO in some of the strategy decisions. You see very often that the original founder, for instance, moves into a COO, Chief Operations Officer role, while an external manager becomes a CEO, right? So those are all the things that an investor helps with. And in the beginning, the very early stages, it's more like advice and mentorship, right? But as a startup progresses, you actually, it's our job to help them find the right people, which is why we have a network, which is why we spend so much time in Silicon Valley and in London and all of these other places, because that's where we find those resources that we can plug into the companies that we invest in.
Thanks, Max. Elina, I guess you can see the questions within this. There are 3 questions, but let me start with first. In your experience, which sectors of the company, I guess for Elina, are the most prone to jump on the startup mindset? Where the innovation sponsors come from?
Which sectors of the company? Very well. It's a great question, and based on my experience, if the company is smaller, let's say 500 people less, that is the range that I'm thinking. I mean, from the top of my head. Very likely the interest might come from higher up, from management, from C-level, or from the C-level suite. The companies that we have worked with, which are mostly, again, banks, telecoms, pharma, logistics, retails, the interest would come from some sort of customer-related department. Okay. It's called differently, but it's either customer service, customer experience, call centers, marketing.
Call centers.
Yeah. Because call centers very often are under customer service. So it very often comes from some sort of customer related department. Sometimes it comes from HR. And that's a very important request. We take this very seriously because that means it's very mature if it comes from HR, because HR talks to everybody else about transformation. So that is my experience.
There's also a question about, I think it's also related to this, that if you mentioned the teams should be cross-functional, where do the members usually come from? You mentioned some of the IT specifics and the marketing and some different data how we collect, but is HR included from the get-go, especially when they go through the training?
Yeah, that's again a very good question. We are just running 2 pilot projects for a client of ours. So again, we started with a group of 20. They went through the initial training, and these are people from customer experience department, product and services, and marketing. So it's a mixed group. And they will continue working in 2 parallel projects. So literally 2 groups of 10 people. And HR was both at the initial training just to see what we teach them, what we show them, etc. And as an observer on the projects. And we have with HR like midterm retrospectives and end of project retrospective, because they are interested in very different things compared to, for example, the project owners, the sponsors of this whole thing, who said, okay, we want you guys, these 20 people, we give them to you, we want them transformed. We don't care so much about the result on the projects because we understand it's more about the transformation of people. But of course, we would be happy to get results on the project. There is something bigger at stake. But HR was there as an observer throughout this project, and that is very important. That means committed HR and committed company.
By observing, let's assume that the project hit also some business KPIs, and also people performed well, and you really saw the change. You mentioned the organizations which are extremely large. How do you then scale this genome? How do you scale this atmosphere, this enthusiasm, these methodologies which you use? And what is then maybe the role of the HR? Was he observing so he can see how they can scale, or how do you scale it? How do you scale it then?
Yeah, so HR has a very important role when it comes to scaling, because together we have to build the next phases of the program. And usually the next phases of the program are getting more pilot teams, to go through the same process. And at some point when we have enough people that have undergone this new process and are still enthusiastic, because I tell you, I mean, some people will be, that's not for me. I don't like this. It's too intense maybe. And that's perfectly fine. You cannot change 100% of all people. That's perfectly fine. But you need, the majority of the people to be
critical mass.
Yeah, exactly. And once you have you would be thinking about the next phase of the program, which typically has a couple of elements. First of all is case studies and storytelling. So collect some stories from these couple of pilot projects, what went wrong, what didn't. Then create kind of a bulletproof training program for more people, and maybe create internal facilitators or internal trainers. If you're really a large organization, that's what's going to save you money, because that matters. So HR is
there any company, I'm sure there is, but from your perspective, is there any company which you can when you can say this is a good example of somebody who managed to scale, actually to achieve this critical mass, to have these internal coaches and trainers?
Oh yeah.
Or some kind of, what is the?
I would give two examples because they're very different scales. So one of the examples, and it's a very, very favorite company of mine that we've worked with for maybe more than 5 years, together with our with the network of offices that we have. We have an office in Berlin, in Basel, and in many other places in Europe. And because this was a really large client, Accenture, as I mentioned them earlier, there are 500,000 people. So what we did with them initially was, trainings that were, we had two different levels of training. One was 1 day introduction to new ways of working, mostly based on design thinking, but also instruments from other methodologies. That was mostly for leadership around the world and for kind of busier people. And a 3-day academy that was for everybody in the company. And after we had, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people that we have trained. We kept looking and we kept an eye on these people and who are the most active people, because the program after the 3-day academy, it goes into coaching. We couldn't coach every single project. That would be impossible at this scale, but we had like checkpoints, like 30 days after the training, we would have a call, 60 days, 90 days, and we would see who are the most active people. And when I say we, I mean we as Launch Labs, but also Accenture Global, the HR department. It's not called HR, it's called learning, but never mind, same domain. And we would monitor people and we would handpick the ones that were very active, and we would put them as co-coaches with us for the next trainings and for the next, online coaching program. So they would learn from us, and this is how we develop internal.
Definitely, you're building institutional knowledge then within the company. Max, there's I wouldn't say it's provocative, but if you were to bet on the legacy business that you would start in 2021 with merger or acquisition of a startup, who do you think it would be? Follow-up question: any hope for the hospitality industry in that field?
So just to make sure I understood you correctly, Costa, if I would start with a merger or acquisition in 2021,
yes. So if you were to bet on one legacy business that will start 2021 with a merger or acquisition of a startup, who do you think it would be?
Right. Oh, I mean, look, specific names very, very, very difficult to come up. I mean, it's very clear that there are a number of sectors where there is a lot of innovation happening, right? Some of the very obvious ones is fintech, right? Like we're seeing, like we really are at a point now, at an inflection point, which I'm sure we'll look back on 10 years from now as a magical moment where, all these online wallets, the whole thing that you pay with your phone when you go to a store, like the companies that build those kind of solutions will be bought by the banks that will survive, right? The banks that won't survive, the traditional financial institutions that won't survive are the ones that won't be able to grab up, a Revolut or an N26 or any one of those solutions, or some of the local ones we have here on the regional markets in our country, right? So I think those are like the very safe bets. In a more exotic ways, it's food startups. Like it's one of those topics that I come back to a lot nowadays. But here in both food innovations, like more, all kinds of healthy foods. Like we're seeing such an incredible surge of healthy food brands. I actually even know a number of Serbian ones, right? Like people who have worked in some really cool consulting jobs or in large corporations in Belgrade, who even build their own food brand, and they do something very differently. Usually using something very local and traditional, but actually know how to market this product, how to make it durable, how to get it distributed in Western Europe or in the United States. And those companies are also, I think, on the verge of becoming something very special, right? So again, when it comes to corporations, the corporations that can get access to that kind of innovation and to that kind of talent are the ones that will survive. The ones that don't, well, we know history. We know the stories of the Kodaks and the, other corporations that just didn't survive that innovation wave.
Cool, thanks. Max, I guess you would agree that startups are famous, at least in these early stages, on closely following the metrics, being obsessed with metrics on customer behaviors. And there's a question actually for Elina: how do you actually measure different stages? How do you track the progress through different stages? How do you, even when the management is aligned and when they ask, okay, guys, show us some numbers. Are we on the, how do you measure the success? How can you maybe use the way of work, how startups measure? And we also nice to have had this experience when one C-level guy said, like, look at this startup, look at this, their Excel sheets, and how do they track every day, every parameter, every figure? Why can we not do it within our company? So how do you, through those stages which you just described, how do you, maybe you can just give us a couple of or two ideas, and then we can wrap it up. And guys, please come on Corporate Innovation Conference. Elina will be our guest, and we will invite Max, of course, for the startup audience, because we know that a bunch of Serbian startups will join their program, I'm sure.
I'm looking forward, by the way, to the conference where I would have a panel, a fireside chat with the managing director of Roche Bulgaria, a company that we have worked with, and that I managed to convince him to tell the story of the exact steps they took as a company, and their mid-sized company, you know, very relevant, I think, to our region, because Accenture is a nice case, but it's out of this world. So very much looking forward to the KPIs question. I'm sorry that this is the last thing that we'll be speaking about, because it's so important, and I'll try to be quick and to the point. So when you have to, you know, when you're trying to change the way people work, it is very important what kind of KPIs you will choose, because if you put on them the classical KPIs about projects, like, you know, if let's say the project is about improving the digital platform and launching new features, etc., and you would be utterly measuring, you know, that the experience on the platform improved, like, are customers more satisfied? Are we getting more customers? Are we selling more through the platform? You know, these would be the classical KPIs. And I agree with this. If we work on a project that has to achieve results, that's the KPIs that we would use. However, don't forget that when we are changing the mindsets, the project is secondary. We want to change the people, not to get results. And there, I recommend, I even wrote an article, and I'll share it with you, and maybe you can share with the audience.
Please do.
The KPIs have to be different. You have to measure things like, you know, project meetings. Are you getting shorter meetings? Project life cycle. Are you getting more iterations in one project cycle? Number of prototypes. Are you getting more prototypes per project? Number of tests. Are you testing more than before with real customers? Number of interviews, data points, if you want, things like, because, you know, whatever you measure is what people will focus on. And if you tell them, guys, it's about really working in a new way, talking to customers, then measure the number of interviews people do. If you tell them it's about building prototypes and testing them with real, then measure that, you know. So this change doesn't come overnight, even if you have the best KPIs and if you find the smart way to collect the data, because that's another point, you know, when you have multiple projects. But what we are trying to do is imagine NBA as a, you know, as an analogy. And startup equals to NBA. You know, imagine this is a top startup. They're doing like the best NBA team. What we are doing with corporations, we're not trying to overnight or even at all to make them play like an NBA team. We're telling them, guys, you know, these are some techniques you can use to play better basketball. And, you know, and to enjoy playing basketball. That's all we do. And in that order of things, I guess Max and his company, he doesn't call us to help, you know, when they cannot deal with corporations. It's exactly the other way around. When we have worked for a little bit with a corporation, and you see them becoming more and more mature, and they're ready to work with startups, to launch startup competitions or hackathons with startups. This is when, you know, venture funds like the one Max is running could help, not the other way around. I guess this would be my last thought.
Thank you so much, both. I would say that definitely we all work together to create better basketball teams. They definitely don't have to be identical, but they can share, and I'm sure there is a huge topic around how they can collaborate, but some other time I see the huge value also there. I hope it was nice for you. You felt okay. I would like to thank you. As you heard, you will get a chance to listen and learn about amazing case from Rosh from Bulgaria on 25th of November, and I will make sure that we get Max to give us details on what is the sweet spot of this new venture capital fund. And it was nice seeing you. Stay well and safe. Thank you again for taking the time.
You too, Costa.
Thanks. And dear participants, stay with us. We will publish announcement for the new innovation space in a couple of days. Thank you for being here. Elina, Max, bye. Bye all. See you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful
Thanks.
presentation.